Okay, so before we get into talking about the future of proof of stake, I think first it's important to celebrate the successes that we have had, right? So first of all, the merge happened. So who here remembers back when like the narrative was that Ethereum sucks because the proof of stake switch would never happen? Who here remembers the that special time when it became clear that like we actually had developers and like the narrative just like quietly switched to proof of stake being bad? So then proof of stake happened, and proof of stake is great. So the chain has been running successfully for now more than 2 years. And at the time when I managed this, took this screenshot, not cherry-picked at all, just the first time I opened the page. It's all of the slots are being proposed, blocks are being justified. Basically, everything is just running incredibly smoothly. And since the merge, Ethereum has just had an incredibly stable network, right? So I think it's important to just give a big round of applause to all of the lots of researchers, lots of devs, lots of client teams, years of hard work, years of failed prototypes that you can find in the depths of GitHub Ethereum research, years of proof of concepts, and finally, 2 years of live software in production that I think has been working just excellently. Proof of stake is decentralized, right? So on the left is Bitcoin mining hash pool distribution. And actually, before the merge, Ethereum mining pool distribution was actually even worse, right? There was like one pool that was something like 40 to 45%. And then over here on the right, this is the Ethereum staking distribution. And even if you just look at the raw charts, it actually looks much, much healthier on the proof of stake side, right? And then once you actually get into the nuances, then you realize like the largest thing on the chart, Lido, it's a DAO, and it's split between I think something like 37 stakers doing most of it, and then another 100 with some smaller share, and it's this complicated mechanism that keeps updating. But the point is that like Lido is not like one guy, right? There isn't like, I'm Mr. Lidon and I'm going to choose to destroy the network today, right? It's it's accurate to think of it as being somewhere in between like 1 and about 40 actors, and it's like the job of the social science people to figure out like exactly what number is fair. Then unidentified is of course much more than one actor, right? And so probably a significant percentage of solo stakers in there, a significant percentage of like small and medium enterprise stakers in there. So staking decentralization is, I think, much more successful than a lot of people have been giving it credit for. And I think also, even the proof of work decentralization that Ethereum had before the merge, I think it's important to remember just how much that ended up being backed by the facts that we're going to switch to proof of stake, and so there's no point in like centralizing everything with ASICs, right? So I think proof of stake has just been a complete success in terms of decentralization, in terms of security, but there are still important challenges, which I am going to get into and talk about, because otherwise there would be no point in having a staking summit, right? It's like, imagine if like staking is, think of like things that actually do work well, right? Okay, imagine if take like oxygen, right? Like oxygen, very important. We need it to survive, right? Imagine if we had like oxygen summits. And then, we talk about different kinds of oxygen, and then, you even have like this little stand on the side, and you have like ozone saying like, hey, look, we're oxygen, but like these guys are O2, we're O3, and that means we're decentralized, right? So generally, if things have summits, that's like a sign that like there still are problems, right? But the point is that I think our ecosystem has a great track record of like actually solving things. So when I think about like how to solve things, right, I think it always makes sense to start from the ultimate goal, right? And so how do I think of the goal of Ethereum, I mean, not like, the like grand like vision of society, how like everything will save the world, but like much more narrow, right? What is the goal of Ethereum with respect to the applications and the ecosystem that it serves? And I think of it as basically, LO1 is like this anchor of the world computer and the Ethereum economy, right? So it's this like central core that provides the security. It is not meant to be extremely scalable or extremely fast. It does need to be powerful enough to have some level of like really important economic activity happening inside of it, and it needs to be safe. It needs to be something that people can run into if suddenly the hordes of barbarian invaders start coming into the countryside and like trying to attack the L2s, right? But at the L1 is there to provide security, and the L2 is GPU of the world computer. It is the engine of the economy, and this is where high performance applications, speed, look, what are we at in terms of latency? Has anyone tried to get into nanoseconds yet? So, like low latency, ultra scale, like all of that stuff happens, right? And so stakers keep L1 secure, and therefore keeping staking decentralized is the top priority. So first of all, let's like think about staking revenues, right? I think, obviously staking revenues at the merge started at this like crazy high number. There were periods that like it was over 10%. I expect, staking revenues will continue to get lower. And this is just, one, because more people are coming in to participate. Also because like there are reasons why lower rates are more secure for the protocol, which is basically one, like literally almost 100% of ETH staking has economic risks, right? It's like, you don't want the entire population of your country to be soldiers. You also don't want every ETH to be staked. Also, MEV burn is likely needed, I think, to stabilize the incentive structure, right? Because if you have the majority of revenues coming in the form of this like extremely volatile thing that only goes to the proposer, there's like destabilizing effects out of that, right? So I do expect that in the future, like returns will be somewhat lower, but this is the key thing, right? Which is that the costs of staking are also going to be lower. And in particular, I think running a staking node is something that is going to become much easier and much less risky for a couple of reasons, right? So we'll talk about making staking more accessible, right? So one of the things that I think we need to do is we need to reduce the minimums, right? So staking right now requires 32 ETH, and 32 ETH is quite a bit of money. Ideally, we want to bring this down to like, let's say 1 ETH, right? And so the challenge is that if you want to bring the minimum down to 1 ETH, well, let's say you have 20 million ETH staking, and then 20 million ETH staking, the minimum is 1 ETH. Anyone want to guess what's 20 million divided by 1? Okay, it's because of Zip's law, it's like probably somewhere in the low hundreds of thousands. That's okay. The worst case is actually 20 million. So basically, Ethereum needs to be able to support a huge number of validators, right? And and so the question is like, how do we do this, right? And so one approach is this technological brute force approach that basically just says we do just the massive scale signature aggregation, right? And there's like interesting research that's been happening on this. So that's like on the left, right? And then on the right here, what we see is there's this technique that's being developed called Orbit, which is like, I think of it as basically being this like linear trade-off between sort of Algorand style staking, which basically have a large set and you randomly choose a committee of them. And the random committee is like good in like basically good enough if you're operating in a traditional academic like assume 2/3 are honest sort of model, but the problem is that it does not have economic finality, right? In the sense that if an attacker does have 51%, then like they can attack like almost for free basically because every time they participate in an attack, only a very small number of their validators like actually reveal themselves as attacking. And so Orbit is like, this is how I think about it, right? It's like basically exploring the whole linear trade-off space between like Algorand style and Tendermint style, where you have a very small number of validators, but you need a huge number of ETH to be one of them. And then basically saying, well, if we take that as the left as x equals 0, the right as x equals 1, then like what does x equals 0.2 look like, right? And like, does that give us enough economic security, but at the same time, like we get most of the benefits of a random sampling approach. And then also there's a third alternative here, which is doubling down on basically saying the staking minimums are going to stay high, possibly get even higher, but we have lots of amazing options to participate in decentralized staking pools, to do delegation, potentially to like decompose staking responsibility into multiple roles, and so on and so on. So part 2, reducing node operator costs, right? So who here runs a staking node? Okay, that's good. So who here thinks that their parents would be able to run the staking node? So it needs to be easier technologically, right? And basically, I think one of the big sources of it being hard technologically is just the fact that currently validating the chain is like this incredibly heavy thing, right? Like an archive node requires something like 2.5 terabytes of space, and then even a regular like full node requires something like 1 terabyte of space. Syncing takes hours to days depending on what type of syncing you do. Then you need to have quite a high level of bandwidth. You need to have quite a powerful computer, and so on, right? And so if we can reduce those technical costs down, right? If we can get to the point where you literally have, like step 1, stateless clients, which would theoretically allow you to just like sync and start staking within a couple of minutes. And then number 2, you get to snark verifying blocks, which would theoretically make given staking on a smartwatch possible. Then like you get to something where at least like theoretically you get the quality of experience that just is downloading and using an app, right? And like these are all things that are totally impractical now, but with all of these improvements that are coming on the horizon, I think they actually will become practical. So another topic that I think is important is like balancing between preserving decentralization and making use of it. So, okay, so here, who here could tell me what is the easiest possible way to make staking fully as decentralized as possible? You make it do nothing. So basically, imagine if, like, okay, here we're going to have a new chain, and we're going to call it like Bob Chain, and here's how Bob Chain works. The way staking works is you take your ETH, and then you put it into a contract. The contract just pays you 2% APR, right? Put in ETH, put in your 100 ETH, and then a year later you get like, you get 102 ETH out, right? Now, this form of staking is also fully trustless. You don't need to have keys. Applications can stake. You can like stake it. You can put stuff into DeFi protocols at the same time. But then who makes sure that the chain is decentralized and who makes sure the chain is persistent? Well, there's this totally other guy named Bob. And Bob just has the master node. And the master node just signs everything, right? So, yay, staking is decentralized. Okay, we won. So the question is like, well, what's not adequate about that scenario, right? And what's not adequate is basically that, well, we don't just want to keep staking decentralized. We want to use decentralized staking as a tool in order to decentralize certain authorities that we really care about. And so which authorities in particular are they, right? One of them is obviously attesting, right? Like we want to decentralize that role where if you get 51% of it, then you're able to do things like censoring transactions, you're able to do things like trying to make attacks that revert finalization, you're able to block finalization, and so on, right? And so one of the ideas in like a lot of recent proof of stake theory has basically been, well, what if you like separate the attester role away from all of the other roles, right? And you say, well, okay, the attester role stays decentralized, and then everything else, like you just like auction it off, right? So one problem, of course, is, well, actually, even if you have that, then you might still have a problem, a chain which is vulnerable to censorship at the transaction inclusion level, right? And so the risk here basically is, well, if you have a chain and like for some use cases, if 99% of blocks censor you but 1% don't, that's like fine, right? It's like, okay, you want like you want to like pay someone and you have to wait 1200 seconds for the payment instead of 12. And that's like annoying, but it's not fatal, right? But then what if you have a DeFi liquidation? And you have some CDP, and then prices are suddenly moving, and you need to add in more capital to make sure you don't get liquidated, right? And then what happens? Like potentially, you might have like a time window of like 1 minute in which you do that, and you send over your transaction, but then you realize like, wait, like 5 proposals in a row are censoring it, and then the 6th one lets it in, but by that time you're already screwed, and like someone made $48 million by snapping up your position, right? So even short-term censorship resistance is valuable for a lot of use cases. And so there's, I think, also value in decentralizing the authority of ensuring inclusion of transactions, right? And this is where a lot of the discussion around inclusion lists is coming from. Also, potentially, you can even talk about like democratizing or like other aspects of block production. And I think there's this like interesting debate, right? Of like basically, if you split up the block production role into like specific types of authorities, then like which ones make sense to maximally democratize, which ones are the ones where you just cannot fundamentally avoid them becoming specialized, which ones are in the middle, and so on and so on. So that's all. Basically, like what are some of the details, right, about like what parts of staking do we try to keep more decentralized? In particular, how do we make sure staking stays decentralized while like actually providing a lot of value and like actually contributing the most important inputs to the chain? So a lot of these things, these are things that are being done inside of the protocol, right? So what can we do outside of the protocol? So obviously, the number of protocol researchers is relatively small, but there's also this really huge community of people outside of the protocol. And I think there's a lot of things that make a difference, right? So first of all, obviously lots of teams working hard on staking hardware, dApp node, squad staking, OBOL, all kinds of staking UX solutions, basically just trying to make the UX side of staking as easy as possible today. Another type of category that like I think is interesting is basically, if you would take the perspective that like you have a particular group of people that are already going to take on the expense of maintaining some kind of node that does something 24/7, then like what other things can you stack onto that, right? And like I think there are answers, right? So like self-hosted LLMs, one answer, decentralized VPN nodes, one other answer. Like basically, you could actually just like go through the list of possible services that someone could provide, and especially services that like benefit from decentralization. And like basically see, are these things that it actually makes sense to just like stack on top of the same hardware as staking, right? So that's like a solution in a totally different direction, right? Because if you think of like squad staking, right, the way that I think about it for me is basically that like a lot of these problems become much easier if you just forget about the requirements that you have to be online 100% or like even 90% of the time. I mean, actually, I think like you guys all overestimate how much you need to be online anyway. Like how many people realize that like what's your guess for what percent of the time you need to be online in order to break even as a staker? Anyone want to shout a number? It's like about like I think less than 50%, like literally, right? And so like people, like I think there is this phenomenon where people are just worrying too much about being online 100% of the time instead of 90%. But even still, right? Even if you want to like really maximize your rates, right? Squats, basically, if you do a squat staking thing and like you have some kind of M of n between, like say, 5 out of 8 participants or something like that, then you could do something where if like each participant is only online 75% of the time, then well, the whole thing actually ends up being online like probably I forget the math, but probably something like 95 to 97% of the time, right? And then if you do that, then like you actually get something where each individual person basically doesn't really need to worry at all, right? So like that's an interesting solution that goes into the other direction, which is basically just trying to like work harder to reduce the amount of effort per person as much as possible. And then the other solution is to like say if someone is putting in a lot of effort, how do you actually dual purpose it? Another category of solutions I think is has to do with some of these centralization questions, right? So on the centralization questions, basically, can you create like more decentralized block building marketplaces that happen on a higher level, right? And like we've seen some of this happen already, and then we've seen MEV Boost. We're starting to see this work happening around Commit Boost. We're starting to see this growing number of people are doing various kinds of pre-confirmation things, and if that stuff is done in the right way, then like that also becomes this like extra protocol way in which you can separate out the authorities that are in staking, which I think also is really valuable. And then finally, like application layer MEV minimization, right? So they're like basically it's actually in most applications' interest to just not leak money to whoever manages to be the first transaction in a block, right? Because it's in an application's interest to not leak money. So there's increasingly a lot of work on these kinds of things as well, right? So I think basic summary here, right, is staking I think has been great already. And there's obviously these really important centralization challenges. And at the same time, there's a lot of really nice in-protocol work that's happening. Highly encourage people to participate in the research on this. And then also there's a lot of opportunity for people to participate in out-of-protocol ways to try to solve these kinds of problems as well. So thank you.
All right. Cool. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Amazing. So yeah, any questions? Please, not price related or anything. Optimally, like staking related. Yeah. Do we have a mic going around? Yeah. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. So dual use implies repurposing hardware.
Stand up, please.
Oh, hello. Hi. So dual use you mentioned implies repurposing hardware. What about repurposing collateral?
Repurposing what?
Collateral, the stake itself. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think like that's definitely another important topic that I totally did not touch on. I think it's definitely pretty orthogonal from a lot of the rest of like all of this side. I think there's definitely valuable applications of this that are starting, right? I think the open question is like, how large will the demand for those kinds of applications be? And like the answer is I don't know yet. And so I think it's an interesting space. It's also like not yet a space that I think we want to like count on as a sort of like this is the thing that will save staking sort of thing. But I think it's like absolutely really worth watching.
Thank you.
Awesome. Do we have another question? Anyone? Yeah. Stand up, please.
What's the biggest surprise to you in the Ethereum ecosystem after the transition to proof of stake from proof of work?
The question is, what was the biggest surprise after the switch to proof of stake? I mean, for me, honestly, the fact that nothing broke. Like.
Yeah, stand up. Yeah.
There's a bunch of work about issuance and like what's the ideal curve. I know you like to look at things from what's the end game or what's the ultimate goal. What do you think the ultimate goal is with issuance for Ethereum?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, for me personally, like, I definitely buy the arguments that we do not want to have close to 100% of ETH staking, right? And like, I think that because that's like, I mean, it has like very poorly understood consequences for like the you know, like the network effects and you know, commodity effects or whatever of ETH the asset. It also basically like it has a lot of risks in terms of rent extraction. It also means that like it's like the last 50 million that of ETH that would stake would realistically be very lazy, and so that like is also a power centralization concern. So like those kinds of things concern me, and so and also just like the fact that I would love for it to be possible to make a fully credibly neutral, like RAI type, you know, decentralized stablecoin. And right now, that's basically not as viable because it has to like either like choose who is its staking provider, or it has to compete with staking. And you know, if staking returns were somewhat lower, that would you know, like obviously solve that problem. But so I do think it makes sense for returns to be lower in the longer term, but I think one really important thing to balance that out is all of the work that's being done in making the costs of staking lower, right, and making it something that like doesn't you know, like require this kind of relatively extreme hobbyist effort that it is today, and it's something that people feel comfortable like more casually participating in with a relatively low level of effort. And I think like a lot of the ideas in The Verge are actually going to get us there.
Do you think decentralization or lack of decentralization on L2s is a problem?
Yeah, so, okay, so my view on L2s is that I think, especially if the more aggressive L1 sort of end game, which like I know Justin is in favor of, and I know you know, there's recently been more of a move toward, actually succeeds, then I basically predict that we'll see a bifurcation into two types of L2s. One type of L2 will basically say, we're a centralized sequencer, we have to be because that's the only way to provide 50 millisecond latency, which is like what the video gaming and like HFT people need. And so like that's our thing. And you know, we're going to have like on-chain governance and checks and balances to potentially switch the sequencer, but we have a sequencer. And then the other type of rollup is just going to be a based rollup, right? Which was just, and when a based rollup, every transaction on, or every block of the L2 just directly is a transaction on the L1. And then in that kind of ecosystem, users will basically have a choice, right? And they'll have one large class of rollups that can offer quite good performance, but where they come pretty close to directly inheriting the full security properties of Ethereum. And like we already see this in action today, right? Like Tyco is running today, and it's like actually quite decentralized. It's already based. Lots of people are starting to contribute blocks. And so look, there is that kind of path, and then there will be users that demand like very low latency and higher speed, and they'll have to deal with like greater centralization, and then they'll have a choice of different governance mechanisms for like what ensures that the sequencer doesn't abuse them.
Awesome. Yeah, another question.
Right now, Ethereum staking benefits from some properties that solo stakers give it. Some people think out there that there are mechanisms out there that we can imbue the Ethereum layer 1 with the properties that solo stakers offer without actually needing solo stakers. Do you believe, A, in the existence of these mechanisms? And if these mechanisms do exist, do we still need Ethereum solo stakers to give Ethereum these properties? Or what, if these mechanisms do exist, do we still need solo stakers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the most important, the one category of mechanism there that like I think is interesting is this like authority separation stuff, right? Basically to try to say, like increase the accessibility of like a type of staking with the authorities that give the core properties that we care about, right? Which I think are basically like censorship resistance, ensuring finality, ensuring like the basic safety of the chain. The challenge that I see with just like giving up on solar staking and basically saying like Ethereum will become a specialist chain is basically that like I think like if you think about this going forward into the long term, right? I think it's right now it's easy to have this assumption that there's like a lot of friendliness, a lot of people believe in Ethereum values, a lot of people have their hearts in the right place and like the same place. But then extrapolating 10 or 20 years forward, you're going to have all kinds of different actors participate in staking. They're going to have all kinds of different opinions. And so if you do have a relatively centralized group that is able to just like come together and say, well, we are the 51% and now we're going to come in and we're going to start censoring stuff, then like that's something that's that becomes very difficult to fight against. And I think solo and medium-sized stakers just are something that's really valuable in fighting against that, because there are a group of stakers that just like they are not going to be part of that coalition, right? There's just so many of them that if they get the phone call at 3 a.m. from Mr. Billionaire Banker, they're just gonna like immediately hit the record button and put the whole thing up on Twitter and Farcaster at the same time, right? So it's and I think if you like look at the practical side of it, like we should, in the technological endgame in terms of scalability, like that kind of separating the authority and like giving solo stakers the powers that matter and letting the specialized role specialized should be able to give I think even L1 the same level of scalability as any other approach.
Awesome. Just one more question from me, maybe. I think everyone in the room is working like in the staking industry, and obviously like Ethereum has done a very great job on decentralization of proof of stake, and we just talked about home staking. But there's like sometimes for home staking, it's like the same rewards like for professional node operators, obviously. Do you have any ideas how to incentivize home staking or solo staking, maybe like economically as well?
Yeah, and so I think there's a couple of aspects of this, right? So one of those aspects is just reducing the disincentives that already exist today. Well, like a lot of which do exist, which I talked about. There are purely economic means theoretically to try to incentivize decentralization, and the work by myself and Tony earlier this year on anti-correlation penalties is like probably the best in class like attempt at actually trying to do that. And the stats there seems to be basically that it would reduce the delta between the revenues of like top tier professional stakers and the revenues of solo stakers by about half. And so like that could get you a lot of the way. I do think that there is going to be like some fraction of effect where like we just have to accept that like solo staking is a kind of hobbyist or like altruistic or like subsidized by things outside of the protocol type of activity. And what we can do is like try to reduce the amount of disincentive as much as possible, so that those counter incentives don't have to be large. But I do think we have to rely on them to some non-zero extent.
Amazing. Cool. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much, Vitalik.